They warned about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump 9 months ago. Subscribe to the channel, like it, and let's start figuring it out. Former President Donald Trump had just begun to talk about immigration in his signature speech when several shots rang out from the podium to his right. It sounded like a small-caliber weapon. Everyone immediately ducked down. There were screams in the crowd as Mr. Trump ducked to the ground before being surrounded by bodyguards. People were screaming and saying, "Get down, get down, shots fired." Here's what we know. Law enforcement officials have so far found no preliminary evidence that Mr. Crooks was part of a larger conspiracy. But they cautioned that the investigation was extremely fluid, and they had yet to extract and analyze information from Mr. Crooks' electronic devices for potential links to other people. The shooter fired multiple times toward the stage during Mr. Trump's rally before he was killed by the Secret Service, officials said. The AR-15-style semi-automatic rifle recovered from the scene is a type that is a common weapon in mass shootings. A New York Times analysis of videos from the event suggests that the gunman fired 8 shots from a small building that sat a few hundred feet from the stage where Mr. Trump was speaking. The shooting recalled assassinations that roiled us presidential campaigns in the 1960s and early 1970s. It prompted condemnations from President Biden, other world leaders, and politicians from both major US political parties, along with a flood of unsubstantiated claims on social media about what took place. Mr. Trump's wife, Melania Trump, issued a statement on social media, calling the shooter a monster and calling for Americans to remember their commonalities, saying that beyond the red and the blue, we all come from families with the passion to fight for a better life together. New York Times journalists were at the rally when shots rang out. The reporter and photographer spoke about their experiences. One photo taken by photographer Doug Mills showed a bullet flying past Trump's head. Some prominent Trump supporters, including Sen. J.D. Vance of Ohio, said incendiary language from Democrats was to blame for the violence. Several of the former president's supporters gathered outside Trump Tower in Manhattan overnight. Mr. Trump's campaign managers, Susie Wiles and Chris Lachivita, sent a memo to employees urging them to avoid their offices while they undergo security screening. In a memo reviewed by the New York Times, they urged employees not to comment publicly on the shooting and said they will not tolerate dangerous rhetoric on social media. In May 2024, Tucker Carlson reported the risk of Trump's assassination when commenting on the U.S. presidential candidate's guilty verdict in a document falsification case, "Import the third world, become the third world." That's what we just saw. This won't stop Trump. He'll win the election if he's not killed first. But it does mark the end of the fairest justice system in the world. Anyone who defends this verdict is a danger to you and your family. And 9 months ago, Tucker Carlson said this, impeached him twice on ridiculous pretenses. It didn't work, he came back, then they indicted him. It didn't work, he became more popular, then they indicted him 3 more times, and every single time his popularity rose. What's next? I mean, let you know, graph it out, man. We're speeding toward assassination, obviously, and no one will say that. But I don't know how you can't reach that conclusion. What do you think about it? Investigators are scrambling to determine if the man who attempted to assassinate former President Donald Trump acted alone, what motivated him to undertake political violence, and how he came to possess a semi-automatic rifle and materials for several explosive devices. Dozens of agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, along with prosecutors from 3 U.S. attorneys' offices in Pennsylvania, executed warrants and interviewed witnesses in an all-hands dragnet that included several other federal and local law enforcement agencies. While the effort was proceeding at a breakneck pace, one senior US law enforcement official cautioned that investigators were in uncharted territory and would not rule out any potential scenario until all leads had been exhausted. As of Sunday morning, they had found no evidence so far indicating that the gunman, Thomas Matthew Crooks, a 20-year-old from Bethel Park, PA, was part of a larger plot. But law enforcement officials cautioned that the investigation was extremely fluid, and they had yet to extract and analyze information from Mr. Crooks's electronic devices for potential connections to other people. The FBI has identified Mr. Crooks, a slender young man with long hair and glasses, as the person responsible for firing an AR-15 type rifle at the president as he spoke to supporters at a rally near Pittsburgh, grazing Mr. Trump on the ear, killing a bystander and injuring several others at the rally in Butler, PA. It could have been much worse, despite the loss of life and the convulsive shock through the country's political system. Law enforcement officials found materials that could be used to make two explosive devices in Mr. Crooks's car and believe they may have found a third at his residence, according to a person with knowledge of the investigation. They now believe it is possible that Mr. Crooks expected to survive the shooting at the Trump rally and might have inflicted further damage if he had not been killed. The semi-automatic rifle found next to Mr. Crooks's body, one of the most common classes of long guns sold in the country, was purchased by a family member, possibly his father, according to an official briefed on the investigation. The man who was fatally shot during the assassination attempt was Corey Comparatori, a firefighter and the father of two daughters, Governor Shapiro said. He said that Comparatori's wife asked that I share with all of you that Corey died a hero, that Corey dove on his family to protect them last night at this rally. Donald Trump is not the first former president to survive an assassination attempt while trying to reclaim his old office. More than a century ago, Theodore Roosevelt was shot just before he was scheduled to go on stage at a campaign event and went ahead to give his speech anyway with a bullet in his chest. Roosevelt's gritty response to the attack in 1912 proved to be the stuff of legends and helped cement his reputation for toughness. To that point in American history, 3 other presidents had been killed by assassins, including William McKinley, whose death elevated Roosevelt, then the vice president, to the presidency. But as of then, no current or former president had been shot without dying. Roosevelt, like Mr. Trump, was staging a comeback attempt, running again for years after moving out of the White House. Unlike Mr. Trump, Roosevelt had left office voluntarily, declining to run in 1908 after serving nearly 2 terms. Instead, he had helped elect his protege, William Howard Taft. But within for years, the two had a falling out and Roosevelt decided to challenge Taft for the presidency. Although Taft beat him for the Republican nomination at the GOP convention, Roosevelt broke off from his old party to form the Progressive Party, also known as the Bull Moose Party, so that he could compete in the fall contest against Taft and Woodrow Wilson, the Democratic governor of New Jersey. On October 14, 1912, Roosevelt was in Milwaukee, coincidentally the same city where Mr. Trump is scheduled to be nominated this week. As Roosevelt left the Gilpatrick Hotel to head to a nighttime speaking event, a man named John Schrank approached and opened fire with a Colt revolver. Several men tackled Schrank, but Roosevelt stopped the crowd from killing him on the spot. Roosevelt, 53, was saved by a metal eyeglasses case and the fat text of his speech, 50 pages folded over so that it was 100 pages thick, in his pocket. But the bullet, even slowed down, still penetrated his chest, and he found blood on his hand when he searched for and found a dime-sized wound. Allies wanted to take Roosevelt to the hospital, but he insisted on proceeding to the auditorium to deliver his address first. And thus followed one of the most extraordinary speeches in presidential campaign history. "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot," Roosevelt told the astonished crowd as he got started. "But it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." Schrank was what is today called a lone wolf, an individual acting outside of any network. When Roosevelt, just shot, asked him why he had done it, Schrank had the dull-eyed, unmistakable expressionlessness of insanity, as Edmund Morris put it in the final volume of his famous 3-book account of Roosevelt's life. Schrank told authorities that he had had visions of the slain McKinley calling for Roosevelt's death, and he had thought that it was his responsibility to stop Roosevelt from breaking George Washington's tradition of serving no more than 2 terms, long before the 22nd Amendment formally put the limit in the Constitution. The attempt on his life captured the imagination of the country. H.W. Brands, a historian at the University of Texas at Austin, wrote in Tr. Another biography of the 26th president. But as impressive as Roosevelt's performance that day had been, it did not propel him to victory. He finished ahead of Taft but, having split the Republican vote, was defeated by Wilson. Unlike a later president, Roosevelt conceded defeat. Like all other good citizens, he told reporters, "I accept the result with good humor and contentment."